This is the start of what might be the coolest table legs I've ever even seen, but they aren't the coolest table legs because of anything I am doing. Almost any of you regular woodworkers out there could replicate what I'm doing with these table legs, which is to build a solid white oak wishbone style. And I have a template available that I sell for these, but it's really just a copy and paste. I'm jointing, planing, and then I'll end up cutting these white oak legs down. But in the end, it's that hand-stitched leather that is really going to set these apart. Before I started this project, I had previously made these same wishbone style legs, and I thought they turned out just a little bit too thin. So for these, I went with a thicker 3-inch or 12-quarter stock, and in the end though, this proves too thick, but I don't know that at this point. So right now, I just need to rough out the pieces on the bandsaw and the miter saw here. I'm cutting just an arbitrary kind of 35-degree angle because the bottom portion of these legs are going to be joined up, and my miter saw is the only tool I have thick enough to cut this accurately, or at least smooth enough that I can create a joint between the two sides. Anytime you're clamping something that isn't a perfect 90 degrees, it can get a little bit complicated. So I saved these offcuts of that 35-degree cut because when I glued them on there, they form a perfect 90. And to attach them to each other, I'm using some epoxy as well as a domino. The domino works really well to help with alignment. And you can see there, those clamping blocks are going to be cut off anyway, so I could glue them directly to the wood. After the epoxy had set up and cured overnight, I got them back out of the clamps, and now I was ready to start tracing on the shapes of this wishbone table leg. And this part is pretty easy. This is just a 3-piece design that gives you the perfect dimensions. You do need something like a jigsaw or a bandsaw, and then at least a router, if not a router table or a shaper. And I love using these white pencils because they are so much easier to see than a traditional pencil. If you're using a bandsaw, it's always a good idea to use some relief cuts like that so you don't get the blade stuck halfway through, and just cut as close as you can to the line without going over. I used to have kind of a bad habit of cutting too far from the line, and that makes it a ton of work for your router and your router bit, which leads to all kinds of problems. So if you can, cut as close as possible, but just make sure you don't go over that line. The bits that I'm using here are made by Whiteside. It's their ultimate flush trim router bit, I think they are called, and they are really, really expensive, but they do work very well. This router bit right here costs more than my first router, which was a Bosch router, so it's not a cheap router. So they are an investment. If you don't know, if you're just getting into woodworking, plan on spending way more on your router bits than you do your routers themselves. After I got everything cut out with the router table, I used some more epoxy and some more dominoes and one clamp just to snug everything up, let it set overnight, came back the next day, and now I was ready to put my radius on. And the radius I'm going with is a 3/4 inch roundover bit, and my tabletop is going to have the same roundover, so it should complement that very well. The tabletop that these legs are going to be going on is made from solid denim, and yes, I mean that same material that jeans are made of, and it has some really cool brass accents, so I thought that the best way to attach the legs would be use these solid brass plates, and they were shockingly expensive and a lot of work, but in the end I think they were totally worth it. You can see just how well that brass complements the denim, but this is Shaheen. This is the mastermind behind the hand-stitched leather legs, and I have a longer video if you want to check that out on this entire process, but he literally made this from one big cowhide. It was really cool. He just saved the last few stitches for when he came to deliver them so he could get a little bit on film. And I love this kind of dark brown leather that we both chose together. There's my brass hammer that he's using to finish it off. I would love to know, what do you think of this stitched leather look? Is this something you would use on a table? And the brass, was it worth it to add the brass to this leather, even though you're never really going to see it? To finish everything off, I added some brass screws because I couldn't imagine using some galvanized steel screws with this brass plate, and it looked pretty freaking cool, but again, you never even see it. And like I said, there is a longer version of this denim table build if you want to see the entire process.